Cool. So today we're going to talk about species of grapes. These are obviously various species of things eating grapes. Okay. So let's talk about taxonomy, right? Not taxidermy, right? Yes, these are in fact squirrels. This is a beer bottle set inside of a squirrel. That is from a brewery called Brewdog, which is a Scottish-based brewery. They have a brewery in Ohio as well. And you can get Brewdog beers here in Ithaca. I think you can get them at Wegmans. I think I got one at the beer shop over in Lansing. This particular beer is the highest alcohol beer I think ever made. It was 55% alcohol done through freeze concentration. So you make a beer, then you freeze it, and then the water freezes first, right? And then what you take off is higher in alcohol, and then you just keep freezing it over and over and over until you concentrate it up. So it was 55% alcohol. These beers went for $20,000 a bottle. So it was actually a way to drum up investment capital for the new brewery in Ohio. I think maybe also when you were buying this beer for the 20 grand a bottle, it had to be. I think you're also getting shares, not just a $20,000 beer. That seems a little absurd. All right, so let's talk about taxonomy. Sorry, it's cut off there. So plants. These are plants, right? So these are eukaryotes. All right, they have complex cells. They're multicellular, right? They're of course kingdom is plants. And then so the phylum are the Magnoliophytes. So these are flowering plants, of which there's over 270,000 different plants within this phylum. And then the class are dicots, so Dicotyledons. I believe some of this may have changed, by the way, and if you know it, you can let me know. The presentation name for Pull Everywhere, you'll see it. I can't remember actually. You'll see it when we pull it up. So yeah, these are dicots or dicotyledons, which are plants that start with 2 leaves from a seed. So like a grass is a monocot. So there's about 200,000 different species within this class. So the order, or the Rhamnales or Rhamnellus, I'm never actually really sure how to say this, or Vitalis, depending on who you're talking to. Taxonomy is incredibly frustrating, I find. I never use it in my daily life. I've never used it as a grape farmer. I'm sure it's useful for somebody. I think it's useful when you're identifying plants. But the thing that's frustrating for me is it changes like every year. Like I feel like grapes are in some new class or something, but that doesn't change how I farm. So I don't know, I'm not that bothered by it. So there are 4 families within this order, and like blackberries is within this as well. And then finally, the family for grapes is Vitaceae, which comes from the Latin root vio, which is like twisting or vining. And these are, so within Vitaceae are a bunch of climbing plants. Okay? And it's about 1,000 species in here, and 17 different genera are within Vitaceae. Okay, so then we're going to get into, and really where we're going to focus our time is genus and species. Okay? So just talking about climbing plants, right? So Vitaceae are woody climbers, and they use tendrils to climb, right? So, and the tendrils are always across from a leaf, right? Always across from a leaf. So across from a leaf will always be either a tendril or a cluster. So you see it right there. So there's a leaf, there's a tendril, so forth. Okay, it's always a leaf or a tendril, or always a cluster or a tendril across from a leaf. And then they use these little tendrils to climb up trellis, right? Or to climb up trees. And so grapevines are actually really just weeds that lived in the wilderness. They live in the They started probably in the Transcaucasus near Georgia, Azerbaijan, that area in the wilderness, and then they used their climbing organs, the tendrils, to climb up trees. So this photo here, I believe, and unfortunately I don't have it referenced. I should have. That's poor form. But I believe this is Vitis riparia here in the northeast. I actually think this is here in the Finger Lakes. But you can see it's just climbing up a tree as if it's like a trellis. And it's climbing towards the sunlight. Okay, so the family is Vitaceae. And then we can break it down into two genuses. And there's the Vitis genus, which contains most of our kind of most economically important species, like Vitis Finifera, which is like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, those things that you're very familiar with are Vitis Finifera. And yeah, they're most of the things within Vitis are Eurasian, so they're mostly from the Transcaucasus area, but there are some North American Vitis as well. I'll talk about the chromosomes in a second. So, and then the other genus is Muscadinia, right? The difference here are the chromosomes, right? So you have 38 chromosomes in Vitis, and you have an extra couple chromosomes in Muscadinia. Within Muscadinia, there's 3 species. Probably though, and again, this is where taxonomy is incredibly frustrating because it like changes every single year, and somebody's like, well, why do we think it should all be one species? And so suddenly something that you thought you knew for years changes on you, and then you find out later when you're giving a talk at some conference, and then somebody's like, well, actually. There's 3 species in here, but truly they all might just be lumped into one, which is Rotundifolia. Okay? But the difference here mainly is chromosomes. There's a couple extra chromosomes in Muscadinia. Okay, so here you see it broken out into species. So within Vitis, there's 60 or 70 different species. What I have listed here are some very important, economically important species for us. So you can see Vitis Finifera being the one that you're very familiar with, I'm sure, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, those sorts of things. Labrusca would be something like Concord, right? Which is like Welch's grape juice. Like that's what we call a Labruscana. So we do use Labrusca. Those are North American. Vitis riparia is also North American. We use that for a rootstock. It's a very shallow rooting rootstock. Vitis rupestris is also North American, which we use as rootstock. Berlandieri is also North American, used as rootstock. And Estivalis is also North American. I think Estivalis is North American, yes. And then, of course, within Muscadinia, you have Rotundifolia, and there are those other 2 species, but they're so similar that taxonomy folks are kind of talking about putting it all together and just saying there's only one species within Muscadinia. Okay, so Muscadinia Rotundifolia, the artist formerly known as Vitis Rotundifolia. So it used to be like Muscadinia used to be considered like a subgenera of Vitis. Like you'd break Vitis into Vitis and Muscadinia. So we used to call it Vitis Rotundifolia. So in the old literature, if you guys do go down this road of grapes and wine and go further in this, you will see things called Vitis Rotundifolia, but it's now called Muscadinia Rotundifolia. And that's actually a relatively new transition. And was one of those very frustrating things for me when I found out, and I think probably at a conference is where I found out, like I gave a talk and I said Vitis Rotundifolia, and someone's like, no. It's Muscadinia Rotundifolia. Doesn't change anything. So it's native to the southeast. So you may be familiar with Vitis Rotunda, or with muscadine if you're from the south. I am unfortunately originally from Florida. I don't tell people much, so keep it to yourselves. And my family's from South Carolina and Virginia. We all now live in Oregon. So we saw the light and we left. But we're pretty familiar with muscadines down in those parts. So it's been cultivated in the United States since the 1700s. It's actually probably the first grape wine made in the US, at least recorded, was probably made from Muscadinia Rotundifolia. Something like Scuppernong was made by the French Huguenots, which I believe they were Protestants or something that were kicked out of France. Somebody in this course will definitely know more about the French Huguenots than I do. But they colonized, they came out here and colonized a bit in Florida, and they wanted to make wine because they had wine in France, and they didn't have Vitis Finifera, but they saw these grapes, and so in modern day Jacksonville, they made some like essentially Scuppernong wine, probably something like that, and did not care for it. Yeah, it can smell a little like kind of rubber cementy. It's very, very different from, I'm sure, from what they were used to in France. Not that what they were used to in France was even good, by the way. Wine back then was pretty terrible. But this was definitely much different from what they were used to, okay? So there are about 152 cultivars of, and you can see I messed up here. I said Vitis Rotundifolia, Muscadinia Rotundifolia. But there are truly, in the southeast of the United States, only about like 10 maybe that are some kind of economically important. They're not really that economically important to even to the southeast of the US. There's really not that much out there. So just to clarify some terminology that we're going to use as I go forward in this course, but variety and cultivar, okay, you're going to hear me use them interchangeably, which is how we do it in the industry, but they actually truly are not interchangeable, and I think it's important that we make that clarification because we're at Cornell and we should teach those kinds of things. So what is a variety? So a variety is a member of a wild population that can interbreed freely and can produce true to type plants from seed. Okay, so if you have Pinot Noir and you plant a Pinot Noir seed, it should be able to grow Pinot Noir from that seed. Okay, but it doesn't. It doesn't. So what we're growing out in the field are not actually varieties, because when you take a Pinot Noir seed, you put it in the ground and you grow it up, the chances are you're probably not even going to get fruit from that vine. And then if you do get fruit, it may not even be red. It may be white, right? It's not going to be true to type. It's like that's not how we propagate plants, right? So what we are growing are actually called cultivars, right? We're not growing wild things. We're growing cultivated varieties, cultivar, which is a plant that has been propagated through human intervention and doesn't produce true to type plants from seed, right? So we propagate things vegetatively. So you take a cutting of the plant, a little snippy snip, and then you put it in the ground and grow it up, okay? So in the industry, and you'll hear me do this, you'll hear everybody do this, we use these kinds of words interchangeably. I think more often than not, I don't use variety, I say cultivar. To get in the weeds with it, right, if we look at papers, you'll see it written out, development, like this paper here, development of proanthocyanidins, which is a mouthful for the word tannin. Thanks, science. Development of proanthocyanidins in Vitis Finifera. L, which stands for Carl Linnaeus, which is this homeboy right here. That's his Twitter right there. If you want to tweet him, get at him. Get in his DMs. So Carl Linnaeus, who's like supposed to be the first fella or first person who kind of like described taxonomically the plant. Okay, and then CV is cultivar of Pinot Noir grapes. Okay, so then if we look at this one, so this is resveratrol, resveratrol is an antioxidant that's found in wine. That was like, resveratrol was what was super hip to study in the mid to late 90s, or like, and people were just like, drinking wine for you is good. It's not good for you. It's not. It's ridiculous. Like, it's great to drink, and it is good for you because it's fun to drink it, and it tastes nice. But don't treat wine like a health food, because if you do that, you're going to get cirrhosis. Okay? It's not a health food. It's the concentration of these nice chemicals and things in wine are not high enough to really have any kind of measurable impact on your health, except for alcohol. And if you drink a ton of it, then you will die. But in the 90s, mid 90s, mid to late 90s, the wine industry was really trying to push this narrative of wine's very healthy for you. It was funding all this kind of wine and health research, and then pushing it to like the Today Show and having, you know, the Katie Couric on there going like, wine's great for you. So yeah, don't believe the hype. But anyway, so that's what resveratrol is. It's an antioxidant that was very popular to study. And then productivity of that in wild grapevines native to Japan, and then Vitis Finifera variety labata and Vitis Finifera variety ganubu. Okay, so those are the differences. So here's our first poll everywhere question. So the question is, how does Vitis Finifera, or how does Vitis differ from Muscadinia? So yeah, so the Vitis is a genus, Muscadinia is a species. Vitis has 2 less chromosomes than Muscadinia. Muscadinia has 2 less chromosomes than Vitis, and Vitis is a species. Muscadinia is a genus. This one is correct. So Vitis, look at that, 100%. Vitis has 2 less chromosomes than Muscadinia. So Vitis is 38, Muscadinia is 40. Okay? Cool.